Judiciary Committee has announced that it will be voting on subpoenas in an effort to get to the bottom of the ethical rot that has embroiled the nation's highest court. That's after repeated scandals involving the justices accepting lavish gifts from wealthy activists, some of whom had business before the United States Supreme Court. The Washington Post is reporting this, quote, Senate Judiciary Committee leaders said they would vote as soon as November 9th to authorize subpoenas for information from Texas billionaire Harlan Crow, a close friend and benefactor of Justice Clarence Thomas, and from Leonard Leo, the conservative judicial activist. The committee said that it would also vote to issue a subpoena to conservative donor Robin Arkley II. Judiciary Committee Chairman Dick Durbin and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse said in a statement this, quote, by accepting these lavish, undisclosed gifts, the justices have enabled their wealthy benefactors and other individuals with business before the court to gain private access to the justices while preventing public scrutiny of this conduct. It is imperative that we understand the full extent of how people with interest before the court are able to use undisclosed gifts to gain private access to the justices. Senate Judiciary Chairman Dick Durbin joins us now. He's the Senate second-ranking Democrat and the Majority Whip. Thank you very much for being here with us on this. It feels like your approach was to give the court a minute to clean their own house, and that maybe these subpoenas and the timing are in response to, one, additional revelations, and two, evidence that they have no interest in getting out a broom and a dustpan. Is that fair?
You're exactly right. We started off by inviting the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to testify before the committee. It was a respectful invitation for him to explain what he thought was the appropriate code of conduct for the Supreme Court and how his justices were living up to those standards. He declined the invitation. We then had a cascade of disclosures of all of the lavish gifts given by this gaggle of billionaires, fawning billionaires, who find great comfort in entertaining the justices on trips, lavish trips involving private jet planes, yachts, the purchase of RVs. The list just goes on, and virtually all of it undisclosed. It took some good journalism to find out what actually happened. This subpoena effort hopes to expand that.
Listen, I will draw on my time in the Republican Party to make this analogy. Sometimes institutions that would most benefit from the medicine of transparency are the most hunkered down. And I wonder if, with all your expertise, you have a diagnosis. I mean, do you view the conservative wing as united in hunkering down and doing nothing to improve their public standing, which has plunged farther faster than any institution in American civic life?
Well, it used to be that judicial ethics was bipartisan, just as short a time as a year ago. But unfortunately, now this appears to be a partisan issue on Capitol Hill. They say, well, you're just mad at the recent decisions by the Supreme Court. We remind them all the time that it was 11 years ago that I first approached Chief Justice Roberts and said, what are you going to do about a code of conduct and ethics on the court? The disclosures were just trickling out then. Now they're gushing out. They involve Clarence Thomas for sure. They also involve Justice Alito and other justices. I mean, the bottom line is this. This is not a partisan issue. It wasn't when I wrote the request 11 years ago, and it isn't now. The issue is this. Why would the 9 Supreme Court justices in the highest court of the land have the lowest standard of ethics? Why wouldn't they at least have the same standards as federal courts under their jurisdiction? If they lived by those standards, it would be a dramatic improvement over the current situation.
Would you invite the liberal justices to testify about their views about an ethics package for the Supreme Court?
I would certainly invite them. I wouldn't hesitate to do it. It's interesting that at least 4 to 5 of them have already stated publicly that they think it's overdue. It's time to get down to business. That's why I don't understand why Chief Justice Roberts hasn't solved this problem that he's facing. He knows that the image and the stature of the court has plummeted because of these gift disclosures. And he knows that he can, in a short order, in a matter of doing it tomorrow, for example, announce a code of ethics that applies to the court. He has a majority of support of the justices who have already declared publicly that they're in favor of it. Why won't he step forward and do this? It'll make several justices unhappy, I imagine. Maybe that's the reason why he's hesitated. But if the court is going to have a reputation that is going to be respected, they've got to do this immediately.
I wonder if part of the reason is that if if lights were to ever shine on the passage of money to a couple of them, and I'm thinking of the revelations that ProPublica has afforded all of us as a reading public about Clarence Thomas, that it would be untenable. I mean, what do you think is there? What do you think is still being hidden by Clarence Thomas?
So last week, the Senate Finance Committee asked a basic question. If one businessman who is not being subpoenaed because he's been cooperative, if one businessman loaned Clarence Thomas about $250,000 to buy one of the swankiest RVs available, and then he made one interest payment in return and stopped paying on it, then the person said, well, I'll just forgive you that debt. That became a gift, or at least income, or something of that nature, which should have been disclosed on income tax returns. You see, once you get into this, it gets a little more complicated. The headline is bad enough, but the follow-up could be devastating.
Well, and the other half of it, right, gets less ink because it's harder to connect the dots. But it's pretty obvious that those people have pretty serious and consequential interests before the court. Will the committee seek to tie the financial gifts to outcomes and understand if anything untoward has taken place?
Well, you're talking about looking back in history, and I don't know if we can or will do that, but looking forward, we have passed an ethics bill, Senator Whitehouse's bill, passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it really addresses the whole issue of recusal in the future, which, as you know, means that a justice says, I have a conflict of interest or an appearance of impropriety, I won't be involved in this decision. That currently is not the case in most instances. It should be a standard in the Supreme Court as it is in other federal courts. And that would govern whether or not they could sit on a court where there's someone, one of these billionaires, for example, who has a vested interest in the case.
It's just amazing. I know your work is the work of good government, but it's amazing that with the politics and the public's view of the court plunging, that they don't see the self-interest in complying with any transparency. We'll stay on this story. Senator Durbin, thank you so much for spending some time with us on it.
Good to be with you, Nicole.